Okay, so it is November 10, 2023. We're in Thomas Bogart's office in Desmarais, 9914. And I have with me an illustrious alumni from the class of 1970.
AKA a dinosaur generation.
Yes, so we're really looking forward to hearing some histories. Thomas Vares, did I pronounce it correctly?
Vares, yeah.
Vares, okay.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm a little bit of a historian of the 20th century. An Estonian of that generation, usually when your family came over here, it was related in some way to World War II. So I was curious how your family came and landed in Canada.
All right, very well. So I am born in Toronto. We lived in the Beach, which is the East End, a very Anglo-Saxon neighborhood, and still perhaps one of the most Anglo-Saxon neighborhoods in multicultural Toronto today. So my parents came from Estonia, one of the Baltic countries, very, very small, about the size of Montreal, a country with a population of about 1.2 million, one third being Russian today. And they were overtaken by the Soviets during the Second World War, and people had basically 48 hours to make a decision. Do they stay and become part of the Soviet occupation, or do they flee? So my parents fled from different families, and they fled across Europe, and my mother and her mother fled to Germany, and they were in one of these work camps in Germany. They were actually in Dresden for the fire bombings by the Allies.
Interesting.
And, they described to me these stories of how all the buildings were burning, and the only way that they could escape the bombed area was to wrap wet bed sheets around their bodies and run between the burning buildings.
What do they use? White phosphorus, I think.
I don't know what they used at that point of the bombing. And also my mother and her mother became separated in Dresden at one point. And so people would go to a wall and they'd write their name and then say, meet me at such and such a place, and people could get unified again. So they, my mother and my grandmother reunited, and then they came to Canada together.
They were displaced persons
Yeah,
in Germany.
exactly. And so they immigrated under that program, and they became maids for the Nielsen family in Toronto, the chocolate Nielsen family.
Okay.
So they were maids for that particular family. That was the first employment they had. Now, my father's story is a bit different. My father was from one of the major cities in Estonia, and there was a political problem in that family, the Vares family, where one of the brothers was a Soviet sympathizer and actually became the first president of the Estonian, the Soviet version of the Soviet version of Estonia, the Estonian USSR. So my father, he fled with his mother and father, and they ended up in New York. And somehow, I don't know the story, but my father managed to come to Canada and established himself in Toronto, where he worked on the railway. And so that's where he met my mother, in Toronto.
So they were both Estonian.
Yes.
But they didn't meet in the neighborhood. They met at work.
I don't, they were dating somehow. I don't know how it was, but the immigrant community is very, very interesting because let's say all of the Estonians that immigrated in that wave after the Second World War in Toronto, they all became a network of friends. And my godparents were friends of friends, and it was a very, very tight network.
It's very typical with immigrants.
And for instance, the street that I grew up on in Toronto, it had 12 Estonian families. Could you believe that? So let's say there were maybe 70 homes on Glen Davis, the street in the East End. There were like 11 or 12 Estonian families on that street.
I think Estonian was Catholic. Is that correct?
No, it is Lutheran.
It was Lutheran.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So you have regular Lutheran, and then you have an evangelical branch.
Yes, I'm familiar with that. So were those church institutions important in Toronto in terms of
very much? So every month, the priest, the minister, would visit our home
Mhm.
and talk to my parents, etc. And every year, an amount of money was identified by the minister as to how much the family had to
The
contribute to the
tithe, yeah.
church. Exactly. So it's almost like the old-fashioned
Yeah,
Catholic
yeah.
way of doing things.
So growing up in that system, I imagine a lot of your social activities would have been in the church.
Exactly. So I went to Estonian church, Lutheran church
Mhm.
in Toronto. I went to Estonian summer camp
Mhm.
where we spoke Estonian
Mhm.
and maintained the language. I went to Estonian school once a week in the evenings, learning how to read and write, learn the history and that sort of thing. So one of the things that sort of bothered me was that being brought up in that type of a home, European home, Canada was put on a second
Mhm.
level.
Mhm.
An Estonian way of doing things was always the best, the superior way. These Canadians don't know anything. They don't know how to make soup. They,
Yeah,
eat soup out of a
yeah.
can. But we European Estonians, we cooked from scratch,
Of course, it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Because they were forced to flee their home. So there was a kind of a loneliness for a home they couldn't go
But
to.
then, but is very interesting is that what they don't realize, and they couldn't go back really
Mhm.
at that point because
Mhm.
of the Soviet situation, is the home country evolves
Mhm.
and advances,
Yes,
and the language advances, the vocabulary
I know.
advances, but the
Yes,
exported colony
yes,
is frozen in time.
exactly. So the linguists come to the United States to study the language because it's
Yeah.
frozen.
So
Yeah.
exactly, and this is what happened, let's say, with French.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
when New France
Exactly.
was established in North America,
Mhm.
the people here, the culture,
Mhm.
the accent,
Mhm.
it froze.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, France, the metropolis, it was
Mhm.
evolving, right? So the Quebec accent that you have today is very much based on,
Mhm.
you
Yeah,
know,
exactly. That's that same. So you really grew up in an English Estonian environment.
yes.
What was your perception growing up about Francophone culture and
I believe in another life I was Francophone because let me tell you, at the age of 5 or 6, when I was sitting down at breakfast, reading and looking at the Shreddies box for,
Mhm.
for cornflakes, there's French and there's English. I was always fascinated. What is this French? We used to get orange pico tea in a
Mhm.
box, right? And they had bird cards, so you could make a
Mhm.
collection of bird cards. They were bilingual, and the instructions of the box were bilingual. So I was always fascinated, by this other language. But the overall attitude of the immigrants vis-a-vis French was, well, why do they think they're special?
Mhm.
There was a little bit of a
Mhm.
a grudge there about,
Yeah.
well, why is that language being given all of this attention to when we,
And that's in the 50s and 60s
yes,
before the sovereignty
yeah,
movements. Yeah.
yeah, even before
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And that value never changed with my
Mhm.
parents, but they were very, very much for me to learn French.
Mhm.
And we learned it in high school in
Mhm.
Toronto. It was only in high school that you
Mhm.
really started to become
Mhm.
seriously studying French.
So did you develop an idea then of Montreal as a cultural
Well,
center? Yeah.
Montreal was, up until 1970,
Mhm.
Montreal was the biggest city in Canada and the capital not only of French Canadian culture, but English
Yeah,
Canadian
that's right.
culture, because CBC,
Yeah.
radio and television, English section was headquartered
Mhm.
in Montreal.
Mhm.
So all of the stars and the writers, and
Mhm.
they were all established in Montreal. It wasn't until the political situation and people moved down the 401
Mhm.
that Toronto overcame Montreal,
Mhm.
and then CBC and the English Center of Culture shifted from Montreal to Toronto.
But you were growing up in this metropole of Toronto, and what was your sense of Montreal as a metropole or a cultural center?
It was fantastic because in my mind, um, the first contact I had with Montreal was 1967, Expo 67,
Okay, let's
and
go.
all the students from Toronto came to Montreal for 4 days or 5 days, and we stayed at the college in the West End.
John
And
Abbott.
The agricultural college.
Yeah.
Yes. And they had like a dorm.
Mm-hmm.
So we stayed there and then we came to Expo and that's where we met French Canadians for the first time. It was totally amazing. And one of the memories I have is they had the Expo train that went around the Expo site. And at one point, there's this dramatic view of the entire Expo site. And there were some students, a class of students from Montreal, French speaking, that were on that particular train with our class. And the minute they saw this huge view of Expo, spontaneously they started singing "O Canada" in French.
Mm-hmm.
It was a totally amazing moment.
Mm-hmm.
But getting back to what you're saying, my affinity and my love for Montreal from that point on was they were European.
Yes.
I was of a European background.
Yeah.
Their values of life were similar to the European values.
So even as a boy reading the cereal box, you had this sense of affinity for that. Somehow.
Yes, and then when I met French Canadians for the first time, when we came here to Montreal in '67, it clicked.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, you know what? They are European.
Mm-hmm.
And they are not, and I don't want to be racist or anything,
Mm-hmm.
but I always felt that English speaking values and culture, it's sterile.
Mm-hmm.
There was something missing there, all right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing I agreed with my parents, that
Mm-hmm.
the European background, we know how to live life
Mm-hmm.
a bit more than just, working 9 to 5, going home,
Mm-hmm.
and that sort of thing. That's the affinity that clicked.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, coming with my school, my public school to Ottawa for a tour also, that was one of the visits that they organized. It was that whole idea, oh my God, like this is where the government is. And I became a political junkie.
Mm-hmm. Did you have a sense that Ottawa was a cultural center, but more political center?
It was not only a cultural center, but when we came here with our class from public school, it was the first time I saw a functioning bilingual environment where you could go into a store and you would hear French speaking and English speaking people, that they had a full-time French radio station, a television station, because in Toronto, it wasn't until about 1970 that they opened up Radio Canada television station service. What they had was, once in a while, they would carry French programs on one of the Hamilton stations, but there was no French-speaking television at that point until about 1970.
So you already told me, you'll probably have to do it again, the story of how you came to Ottawa, but I can already see you had a kind of affinity for French culture.
So I had this urge of becoming French Canadian. Pierre Trudeau had a lot to do with it. He was my absolute idol. And when I came here with my public school tour, it was the end, the end of public school as such. We bumped into him. He was getting into his car, and we got to talk to him. So it was, yes. So that was the first a real step towards Ottawa. So what happened was, I enrolled in the French program at Glendon College, York University, and in the '70s and late '60s, it was a totally Francophone college, Lawrence and Bayview. Beautiful campus, nice mansion, and classes were very small, and it was a totally French program. Today, I think it's sort of transformed itself into half French program, half York University English program. So I took 2 years there and learned everything from French Canadian literature, took courses in French Canadian history, took courses in French Canadian politics, nationalism, all of that. And after 2 years, I sat down with my counselor and I said, this would have been 1970. I said, well, listen, how can I really, really improve my French? Should I go to Quebec City for a summer job, or, what are my options? And they said, well, you know what you could do? You could go to University of Ottawa. They have a fabulous program there where, as an Anglophone, you can take your history courses in French, but you can write your essays and your exams in English. So you get the best of both worlds, and you get really immersed in French. I said, well, that sounds fantastic. So I spoke to my parents, they were all for that. And I arrived here at Ottawa U for my third year. And this would have been 70, 71, 72, and loved it and never went back to Toronto and graduated.
So you did 3 years at Ottawa?
Two,
Just two years.
2 years in, sorry, 2 years and then 2 years.
2 years. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, it was fabulous. Fabulous. Got a job on the Hill as a student during the summer.
Oh, as a page or in a permanent job?
Working in the post office.
Okay.
You know, yes.
It's important.
Sorting mail for the MPs.
There was a lot more mail back then.
Yes.
That was a lot of email.
And it was fabulous. And then became involved in with the Liberal Party. I became a young Liberal, and that's a whole different story. And yeah.
I'd be curious to hear that too, but we probably will leave that leave that beside. So what were your first impressions? You talk very positively, but I mean the first time you kind of came off the train, and where were you living? Were you living in residences? Did you get an apartment?
Yes. Well, you know what? I have to tell you the truth. Some of it's rather wild. So my father drove me to the airport in Toronto to come to Ottawa. And as we were driving to the airport, he gave me the father-son speech. And he said, you know, we're so proud of you. You know, we have absolute confidence in you. We know that you're not going to be a political radical. Although I was, you know, a flower child of the 60s, and, you know, a Beatles fan. And, you know, so I was a little bit of a cultural revolutionary. He said, we have absolute confidence in you, and we know you won't do drugs and, you know, alcohol and that sort of thing. And I didn't even smoke. So, you know, we know that you're going to be a good boy. Oh, well, let me tell you about first week in residence. I'm not even going to go into the details, but all of that just went out the window. All right. So my first impression of the societal, so the society or the culture of the university residence culture was, it was really dominated and immersed in the drug culture of the 60s.
Okay.
You know,
so
even in
alcohol,
we're talking about alcohol, hashish, marijuana, LSD was very, very big. Let's put it this way. First week in residence, and I was on the Marchand residence right by the driveway there on Nicholas Street. I had marijuana for the first time. And I think it took me 3 mornings to wake up and not be floating above my mattress, I think, or whatever it was. So I indulged in that, but I knew what my limit was after that. And so as I saw my friends advancing from marijuana to hashish to LSD and that sort of thing, I would be in the room and I would decline. And quite sometimes it was quite difficult to be the only person in the room that was there while everyone else was hallucinating or doing what they were doing. But I don't blame them or anything. But that was my first impression. Now my second impression was, well, coming from Toronto, this is the first time that I met people from small towns.
Yes.
From Kingston, Napanee, Porcupine, or whatever it is. They had an entirely different view of life and absolutely different values. And I found myself to be the goody-goody of the bunch.
Coming from Toronto.
From a strict European home.
Were they rebelling against their conservative?
I don't know. I think it was just values. And again, you know, I'm not being critical of these people because they were wonderful people. But for instance, you know, I'll give you one example. So this, you know, Thomas, you know, we've got to shake you up here, like get you into the real world. So have you ever shoplifted? I said, what are you talking about? Said, well, you know, shoplifted, go into a store and steal something. I said, absolutely not. I've never done that. I said, how can you possibly do that without being arrested? So they said to me, there were like 2 guys from Kingston. Okay, we're gonna go to Spark Street. There's a Kresge's. We're gonna show you how to shoplift.
They broke you in.
Okay, so we went. So we go into the store, and this one guy from Kingston the leader sort of our pack, said, okay, so this is what you do. You see that lighter over there? This is winter. He said, you have one glove here and one glove there. So what you do is you pick up the lighter, you look at it and you put it on top of that glove. And then when no one's looking, you take the other glove and you put it on top of that and you walk out of the store. So I looked at the lighter. I never, you know, and I just said, I'm sorry, I can't do it. I can't do it. I
You're
just
being a good boy, like you're.
no, it wasn't a question of being, I couldn't do the dare. It was a dare. I said, like, I'm sorry. I mean, you can call me a suck if you want to. I cannot do it. Then the second guy, I won't tell you his name, but he was wearing one of these huge leather cowboy hats that they were wearing in the 70s. And it was a winter's day and there was like a blizzard outside. So we were the only people in this Kresge store. So I, defied the dare. So this other guy said, well, you see the records over there? I'm going to go over there and I'm going to steal one of the records. And I looked at him and I said, the store is completely empty. There's three of us in this store. He's got this incredible hat on. I mean, I said, you know what? I'm out of here. I'm going back to residence. You guys can do whatever you want to do. So I went back to residence. An hour later, the phone's in the hall, and I get buzzed saying, there's a phone call for you in the hall. I pick up the phone, and it's this guy. Well, what do you want from me? Where are you? I'm at the police station. They won't let me out unless somebody comes down and signs for me. And then, I can get out and then I have to go to court, sort of thing. Right. So that was, but no, that's just an example of values. And I guess it was
call that the teenage rebellion culture. Like these were wild and maybe they settled down after a couple of years.
I think, again, I've never been brought up in a small town. I've been brought up in the big city, and I said, a disciplined home, first generation Canadian from a European family, where it's, the father, the head of the family says, as long as you live in my house, and he really said this, when I tell you to jump, you jump, and halfway up, I'll tell you how high. And and if you don't want to follow my rules, and you go and get your own house, like that's the type of European home that I was brought up in. So looking at these people from small towns, I think they just had different set of values, and I think they saw Ottawa as the big city, and and you're right, that here is a chance for them to act up and refute and not be impressed with the bigness.
College was part of breaking away from your parents. I mean,
and the value, and the values. And I must say that I think you're onto something. I had that same feeling in a sense, but I always had a desire to push my parents and their insistence on Estonian background to the second level and bring my Canadian to the front level. And most of my Estonian friends remained in the Estonian culture. And I said to my parents when I moved to Ottawa, and everything, I said, this is an important step for me, because you know what? I am Canadian first, Estonian background second. Never, ever question that. So I'm not going to waste my time going to Estonian dance group or the literature group. I said, I want the Canadian experience. So I'll take that time and I'll learn about French Canadian literature and culture. So that was a little bit of my revolt, but there was a bit of patriotism in that.
I want to go back to something you said, because that might help to explain it. You said, well, you identified as a flower child, like you were influenced by the
Beatles.
But what did that mean? Okay, you listened to a lot of people say the Beatles.
I'll give you an example. So classical music at home, records, your parents control the record player. So it was classical records. The only other music there was Nat King Cole, I think, and I think there were some Sinatra discs. So one day I went out and I bought one of the Beatles albums. This would have been what? 66, 65, 66, when they were first coming in with the rock.
The invasion.
Yeah, and I put that on the record player in the living room, and my dad walks in. what on earth is that? What is that stuff? And take that off. And why are you playing it? I said, because I like it. I like it. And that was sort of and I was surprised because he didn't challenge me
Mhm.
on that. Usually I
Mhm.
was challenged on everything. Like, they determined what type
Mhm.
of haircut. My mom bought me all my clothes.
Was it a crew cut?
Yes. So, and if the Beatles cut, oh, please, I was dying for that. So, what I'll give you the example of how I broke away out of that mold. So my mom once in a while would give me her Simpsons card, retail card on to go downtown to Queen Street to buy her a particular fashion pattern or something. And then she would always say, and while you're there, buy something for yourself. So this would have been 68, I think. So I went downtown to the Simpsons store and I bought her pattern or whatever it was. But I saw these Sonny and Cher bell-bottom jeans with flowers and yellow and orange and
Yeah.
checks and
Yeah.
stripes.
Yeah.
And I said, I have to have these.
Wow.
So yeah, so I bought these, went home, and it gave my mom. I mean, my dad hadn't come home from work at that point, and gave my mom what she asked me to buy. And then I said to her, Mom, can you hem these pants for me? She said, you just take those things back right now. And when your dad comes home, I'm going to tell him, blah, 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 blah. So what I did was I went upstairs. I've never done any sewing or whatever it is. I went into my mom's sewing kit and I hemmed.
Mhm.
I don't know how I knew how to do it, but I shortened those pants. And so, but I was afraid to come out of my room. So I heard downstairs my dad was home and there was the usual call, dinner time. Go downstairs. So I go walking downstairs into the dining room and my dad and my mom are there. And I'm
At the table?
yeah, at the table.
Yeah.
And I'm just like I'm modeling these Sonny and Cher flower child bell-bottom pants. And you know what? They didn't say anything.
You think they had discussed it
I
between?
don't know. I don't know. But
Yeah.
nothing,
Yeah.
no criticism, absolutely nothing. From then on, I was able to choose my clothes. I don't know. I think whether they came to some sort of an assessment at that
Do you
point.
think they viewed that as a threat? They were going to lose their son, or what was the threat presented?
I think it was cultural. I think it was saying that, like we wanted like this straight European
Mhm.
type of child, conservative and not into all of this, cultural revolution and everything. But it was sort of step by step. So it
Mhm.
was the music that I wanted to hear. It was, getting the bell bottoms.
But it seemed like with the way you're describing it, you can tell me if I'm right or not. For your parents, it was a sense of you developing your own identity away from old Estonia, but they didn't see it as like you were becoming liberal, promiscuous.
No, no, and I think they also found it to be a reality,
Mhm.
a reality in a
Mhm.
sense. And I think they understood that, I was growing.
Mhm.
And, at one point you have to show some respect
Mhm.
and acceptance as such. So, that was so the music, the clothes, and then after the pants, then the hair
Mhm.
became, I could go to the barber alone and I could decide on,
Okay.
but education, strict control. Okay. And I'll never forgive my dad for this. So high school, he forced me to take Latin for 5 years. And my God, I hated that. I hated
Very
that.
valuable for a historian.
Oh, please. Are you kidding? I've never used it a day in my life. And my dad, it was, oh, my son, if you want to be a lawyer, you want to be a pharmacist, you want to be a doctor, you have to
Mhm.
know Latin. Oh, please.
Latin died, I think, about 10 years later.
I think the only thing it helped me with is learning French,
Yeah.
German. I've studied German, I've studied
Mhm.
Russian, studied some other languages. How to parse sentences, subject, adjective, adverb,
Mhm.
that type of thing. You can go into different languages. And that was the other great thing about the public school system and taking English was that we took grammar. So you would take, it was called parsing. So you would take a sentence in English and identify the subject, with a squiggly line, the verb with one,
Mhm.
brackets
Mhm.
for adjectives, square brackets for clauses, that, cases, accusative,
Mhm.
nominative, that sort of thing. And you really learn the skills for almost any language. So this would have been about 2015 in Toronto. I took German.
Mhm.
Cases are very important
Mhm.
in German.
Yeah.
And I was the oldest person in the class, and I was the only person who understood when the professor was saying, well, in this particular case, this is the object, but it's object of the preposition, not
Mhm.
the verb,
Mhm.
and we went into that, and all the younger people in the class are saying, well, how do you understand all of this stuff?
Right.
And it
Right.
just clicked because my brother went to school 5 years after I did, and the grammar study had already changed from forget about subject verb, just look at the sentence and learn it.
Kind of
Yeah,
excellent.
yeah.
So can you go a little bit back to Frosh Week? It sounded like, all
I'm
these
getting off
people,
track, I think. Yeah,
all these people are coming from different areas
yeah,
of
yeah.
Ontario. They're broken away from the nest of their parents,
Yeah.
and it just seemed like it was a wild party. Do you remember, what it was like? You were in a dorm, so
It was absolutely party, party, party. And, whichever group that you belong to, it was very difficult to study.
the group you belong,
Yeah.
the people
Oh,
on your floor that you were assigned to live with.
yeah, yeah, let's put it this way, all right. Um, the favorite thing was let's skip class.
Mhm.
Oh my God, right? High school, you can't. You get a detention. University, no one is checking you.
Mhm.
So there, let's not go to, let's skip class today and, go down to the Benny for a beer or
Mhm.
whatever it is, right? It got to the point where at the end of the second semester in third year, where you have to sit down with your professors and decide on what the subject is for your essay or whatever it is, I would show up and the professor would look at me and say, who are you? I have never seen you before, right? And as a result, I was called into the dean's office and I was told point blank, sorry, we're not going to allow you to go on to the fourth year program because your marks are a disaster for
Mhm.
for third year. Oh my gosh, just like Alex Trebek, who got a second chance, I pleaded and I pleaded and I pleaded and I said, look, this would be the end of my world. I could never go back home if this happened to me. Please, please, please give me a chance. So they said, all right, we'll put you on probation. So first term, fourth year, you're on probation. If you don't get over 65%
Mhm.
in everything, um, you know, we
That's
won't
it.
allow you to proceed. Well, did I learn?
Mhm.
No more parties, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, totally in the library all the time, reading, doing my essays, studying, regardless of what my friends said. So the end of the term, um, the offices were in the arts building,
Mhm.
the old arts
Mhm.
building. That's where you had your advisor. Things were just starting to be computerized,
Mhm.
for administration. Obviously, we
Mhm.
didn't.
Mhm.
Ordinary people didn't have
Typewriters.
computers. Anyway, so went to meet my advisor. I hadn't received my marks yet because there's always like a month's delay before you get the paper thing in the mail. So I scheduled a meeting with my advisor, and she said, "Okay, well, this is the moment of truth. Your marks, I'm going to click in your file number, and all of the marks are filed now. So this is the moment of truth." And I'm just sitting there saying, "Oh my God." Then, of course, they came in sort of one, she said, 95,
So
86.
you were a little bit uncertain, even though they're
No, no, I was just, and she's reading them 95, 85. 82. I did it.
Mhm.
I did it. And from that moment on, I knew what studying was all about.
Mhm.
But that became a very important moment in my life in the sense of second chances.
Mhm.
So this would have been the year 2004 when I was in Toronto. I've had so many different jobs, and I don't know if you want to get into that. But at one point, I was teaching public relations in a 3-year program at Durham College in Oshawa. I lived in Toronto, I commuted. So I had a 3-year program. And so I had students that just came out of high school, or I had people who were adults who were changing their careers. So what I saw, there were many, many students in my first year class that had trouble adjusting, skipped classes the way I did, goofed around, and I could have kicked them out of the program. I had that same serious talk with them. And you know what? When they graduated, many of them were the stars and won all the awards. And some of the people who were excelling in first year never graduated in third year, right? So I remember the convocation at one point for after, at the end of the school year at that college, and all of the professors were sitting on the stage behind, and then all of the students are named and they come up and they get their diploma, and also they get their awards. And so we're sitting there, and some of my students are coming up and I say, yes, and well, I kicked her out of my classroom. I suspended him for a week because he wasn't adjusting. So the little bit of discipline in the talks really worked. The second chance seemed to be really working. So the big value that I get from Ottawa U and my own experience was, in life, you need to give people a second chance.
And apply standards.
Yeah, apply standards and have the serious talk, but don't just write them off. You have to explore, an opportunity. So that was one of the big takeaways from Ottawa.
If I can just go back to the parting of the early years, there's one subject I haven't gone into. You can feel free not to answer for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But the hippie house was the element of the free love movement, the pill, and everything else. To what extent? We know there was a lot of alcohol on campus. You were talking about recreational drugs. To what extent was hookup culture?
Okay, I have to tell you. Okay, so I've always been gay, but I was never active until much later in life. And I have to say that in my group, we were not aware that there was any sexuality going on in residence or the campus. I think once in a while we heard a story about, people, a couple hooking up or here. But in my particular group, no, there was no, it was more like goofing off and all that sort of thing. But no, hookups and sexuality was not really that evident in our group. And it was perfect for me because one of the things that is not really openly discussed in many European families of that generation is sexuality. So never had a discussion with my parents about sexuality until my 40s, when I went home and we had that discussion about being gay.
Do you think they suspected? I mean,
well, of course, parents know that. They know their children,
but they didn't want to confront.
But they don't. I think they just park it, park it on the side and don't deal with it and don't. Yeah. So, do you want to hear this? I don't know if you want to hear that story, but that's really not related to Ottawa U.
Okay. Well, you can tell whatever stories you want, but one of the things you mentioned, you were really a Francophile.
Yeah.
And the impression I got from other people I've interviewed so far, and I'm just at the beginning of the process, the Anglophones and Francophones were relatively segregated in the sense that the classwork, there were English and French classes like today. And, there was some, in the dorms, there was the meeting of Anglophones and Francophones.
Absolutely. I would say that in residence, there was no differentiation between Francophones and Anglophones. Everyone mixed, particularly if you were having lunch or dinner at the cafeteria. You never know who you were sitting with, but it was camaraderie. And you had many really interesting situations where you had Anglophones who didn't speak a word of French, and you had Francophone. You
Yeah.
had some Francophones who didn't speak a word of French. And to give you an example, one of the great things in residence was ordering a pizza at midnight. And so,
Universal.
yeah, yeah. So remember, one day I was responsible for taking the order, and there was one guy in our group who was a Francophone who did not speak any English. So my French at that point was more or less high school French with a little bit of advancement here. I remember speaking to him and confirming with him, what do you want on your pizza? Okay. And he clearly told me the only thing he wanted on his pizza was anchovies. And I looked at him again and I said, are you sure? Anchovies? You know, like this is what you. So the orders came in and he gets his pizza and he opens his box and he has a fit because all it is cheese and anchovies. And I said, but that's what you told me. And I asked you several times. So once in a while, like, you would.
Lost in translation.
Yeah. The other game in residence that was a lot of fun, and the radio stations and the school became came onto it, was we would phone the radio station and say, this is the University of Toronto of Ottawa calling, and all classes are canceled tomorrow. It's a snow day. And they would broadcast it over the radio saying that all classes were canceled at University of Ottawa, right? And it caused a total chaos. So finally, the radio stations in the university got smart, and I think there was a code number or that the university would give the radio station to assure them that it was a valid thing, right? So yeah, so we got away with a couple of calls in about snow days.
You're going to be a big star for the students because a lot of things you said are very insightful. We're dealing with society from.
Can I just go over some stuff that I think
I was going to.
Yeah, and then you can and maybe follow up.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to say a couple of things. So, coming to university and University of Ottawa, of course, as you said, the early 70s was a very important time in the world of transition. And just some of the events that are remembered that are related to that in Ottawa U was November 1971, they were doing nuclear tests in Alaska, and Chitka was the island. And there was a lot of turmoil and anti-nuclear movement. And this was my first political expression. And it happened, and we organized ourselves into a demonstration and went to the American embassy. And I remember having this sign that said, "Bomb Washington, D.C., not Chitka." So that was my first political protest. Then in April 72, Nixon came to Ottawa, and he came from the airport, and his limousine went by the driveway just down there. So all of us ran from the residence down to the driveway to wave as his limo went by. So, I just remember that
like a friendly wave?
Yes, I think it was a friendly wave at that point because, he was the president of the United States. And although, we protested this and that, Canadians of that generation was still very much in awe. This was the big brother and we were the smaller.
Okay, because when Trump and Bush came, they got a welcome too, but there was quite a few times.
Then September 72, the Russia-Canada hockey game.
Yeah.
We were all glued to the television sets in residence for that particular game. And it came across in the afternoon, I think. It wasn't an evening broadcast because it was live. And when they won and that final goal was scored, the whole campus emptied out downtown with Canadian flags and people were running all over the place. So that was an event that I will never forget. Then there was 1972, the election, federal election. Pierre Trudeau was reelected, but it was, I think, with a minority government at that point. So the political parties were very active on campus in recruiting, and I was recruited to work for John Turner in Alta Vista. That was sort of his riding, and that's how I sort of became really involved with the Liberal Party at that point. Door to door canvassing and knocking on doors, and it was a really interesting canvassing technique for Turner. So we as young people would go to an apartment building and knock on all the doors saying, John Turner will be in the lobby in 40 minutes. So if you want to meet him, come downstairs in 40 minutes and you can talk to him.
Yeah.
Then he would come down and we'd be at the next building knocking on doors, sort of thing. So it was really, really organized. And he, at that point, was looked at as the JFK. In waiting, like the
and the
of course, Trudeau was the star and everything, but he was already there. But Turner was sort of looked at as the the leader in waiting. Yeah. Let's see. History department personnel or not?
I would love to know more about the history departments.
Yeah, so there were three particular professors of note that I remember from the history department. Canadian history was what I was studying. There was Jacques Monnet, and I think he was Frère Jacques Monnet, a noble,
Noble.
Yes.
Left over.
And his specialty was the monarchy and the Constitution. And I could not get over that because one of the values that stayed with me from my European background was monarchy. What the heck is that, right? And so I've always, and very British, so I've always rejected that. So I was.
Did he give you Jeffrey Elton and all those type of? Yeah, that was what you were reading. Yeah.
And he became the specialist on the monarchy in Canada for visits and the government. And I think he had some sort of a book with the Governor General or something like that. And then there was Fernand Ouellet. I think he was a brother as well. I'm not sure. But his specialty was French Canadian nationalism and politics. So he was the one that really gave me the understanding of the Quiet Revolution and understanding the October crisis and that sort of thing. Then there was John Trent, who I think was one of the longest reigning professors at University of Ottawa, and he was a constitutionalist as well. So I remember taking constitutional history with him. And then there was Dave Broadfoot from Toronto, and he was the first socialist professor that I really ran into. And he wrote a book on the Depression in Canada, which is the Bible. Broadfoot on that. So those are the professors that I sort of really.
There was some Marxism on campus. Was that more in the social sciences than the faculty of arts?
I think it must have been more in the social sciences because really it wasn't really that evident in the history side because it was past political history. And since I didn't get any Russian history, or maybe it came out of that, or I didn't study European history as such, but in the Canadian history, although there was socialism and Marxism in Canadian history, it really was social history more than political history. But of course, today, we know it was a very significant movement, not only in Canada, but in the United States, that has more or less been overlooked. But I think that's something that social history is really looking into.
Can I ask you some basic details? I mean, especially students be very interested in it. I mean, one of the things that students need to do in their advanced studies, so you're in the third and fourth years, you have to write a term paper. So describe to me one of the term paper assignments that one of these professors would assign to you.
Okay, I'll give you a good example, and this would have been with Ouellet. I believed in my studies that yes, the Act of Confederation in 1867 was the union, of the Canadas. But in my mind, it was the separation of French and English because Quebec became its own province. Previously to 1867, Quebec was part of the union of Upper Canada and Lower Canada. And he vehemently disagreed with that because he liked to focus on the union. And I wanted to write an essay saying that, in fact, in many ways, the Confederation Act of 1867 was an act of disunion as much as it was union.
So where did you have this debate? In his office?
In his office, in the little building with the crooked, floors. And he just would not hear of it. And then finally, somehow, I guess, he said, okay, I did. So I wrote my essay. I made my point, and if I remember, I got a very decent mark for it. And that was the point that I've always wanted to emphasize in that particular area.
How long was this term paper?
This term paper would have been 30 pages, typed double spaced.
How many sources?
Oh, come on. In those days, what? In those days, you go to you go to the library.
This is why I want you to tell us.
In those days, you go to the library with an index box of recipe cards and elastic bands, okay? And you spend days and days reading these books and noting on these recipe cards. Quote, page 5, So at the end of your research, you've got like a box of recipe cards like this, and you have to sit down and play solitaire, map it out on, how on heaven's name are you going to put this together?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was the big challenge. And then in residence, of course, when is the best time to do this? After midnight, when people, and so you're sitting there and you're typing.
You went to the lounge to find a big table to put your cards.
Well, no, I had them on the floor, of my residence.
Okay.
And then, of course, 1 o'clock in the morning, you're typing because the essay is due the next day and you leave things. Okay, so it's like, ding,
your roommate's sleeping.
Bing! And people are coming knocking on your just, can you please tape your bell? Sort of thing. So yeah, so that's the way you did your essays.
These students are so spoiled, they just not understand. We have to go into detail.
Yeah.
Explain how a typewriter works and how
Oh God, and Underwood was the brand. Okay.
Yeah.
And you know what? And then the only way that you could correct a mistake was by having this white liquid that you could put on
liquid
it.
Paper.
Not a liquid paper or whatever it is. And but just an aside, and that was the curse of working in government, was if you were writing a letter for someone's signature, you made a mistake in the last sentence, you have to start all over again because you cannot use liquid paper for a formal document. So in those days, it was a pain in the butt, let me tell you. And then buying ribbons.
About footnotes, though? The footnotes, when you decide to change, you just write it in.
My God,
yeah.
And let's put it this way: when I was doing, in the mid 2000s, doing my master's in social history in Toronto, what a difference! My God, you've got everything on your laptop and cling, 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 cling. It's there. And now you have this paragraph and ship that, and
now you have this algorithm, this chat GPT.
I've actually tried it, and and sometimes it comes up with an answer. I'm really new and I'm just learning about this.
Yeah.
Or sorry, I don't give medical advice. There are certain, but I think. And I know that professors have a very different view of this, but the chat, as long as you as the student understand what the chat is providing you with and you agree with it and you can source it and then identify that particular source, I wouldn't have a problem with it. And I think maybe that's the compromise that scholars are going to have to come to, say that yes, you can use artificial intelligence, you can't deny it, but as long as you are able to go back beyond the artificial.
You captured the problem that the professors are still in the 1970s. The students are already looking to 2040 when they don't have to do any work.
You have to sort of when I wasn't that much of an academic professor at Durham College. It was more or less a communications course, and I did teach them communications history. And by the way, Mackenzie King, our first prime minister, he was the first practitioner of public relations in North America, because who was the rich millionaire with the coal mines in the United States?
Carnegie. Carnegie. Dale Carnegie?
I think it Carnegie, or there was another one. Anyways, he went down. There were coal mine strikes, And Mackenzie King went down and taught him how to treat his employees, how to negotiate the strikes, and as things such as, you know what, you have to have family picnics.
The Harlan
Or,
County War.
yeah, you have
see
to
what
have
you mean.
that family
Yeah.
picnics, and
Mhm.
you have to do this. So our prime minister, and he was like an incredible prime minister during the war as well. If you go back into actually studying what he did, all of the committees
Mhm.
and organizations that he had to set up
Mhm.
internally within his government during it is like totally amazing what this man did. He's identified as a kook and all that sort of thing, consulting ghosts and everything. But the man was an organizational administrative genius. Yeah.
You promised some stories about women on campus. That was one big theme.
All right, and this goes to orientation week.
Mhm.
So orientation week is organized in residence by the senior guys in the men's residence. At that point, we didn't have,
Mhm.
co-ed residences. So I was in Marchand,
Mhm.
and I forget what the women's residence was called. Tabaret? No.
No.
Anyways, yes, Stanton. And there were two towers, men, women, and then the cafeteria joined the two towers underneath, right? With a pool room. And that's where it was, mingling. So the seniors in the men's residence organized orientation week. So there were a couple of highlights of orientation week. The first one was the panty raid. Talk about sexism, all right? So the panty raid. So the senior guys in the men's residence would, line us all up, the newbies, and we would have been maybe 50,
Mhm.
and said, okay, so we are now going to do a panty raid. So what you need to do is you need to storm the women's dorm, and you need to get into a room and steal a pair of panties and come back. And you can't come back until you bring some panties back. Oh my God. So this, I'm telling you, I am not exaggerating, folks. This was totally out of
This is
control.
like storming the castle.
Oh,
Were they protecting the
but
domain?
it went beyond. It was totally out of control. So in order to get into some of these dorms for the women to open, at one point I remember being in a hall where the guys got the water hose, the fire hose out of the wall and started just blasting it at doors. And unfortunately, with this one girl, she opened the door and the fire hose is going like right into her residence room. People storm in, get their panties. One point I remember looking at another open door, and somehow somebody had taken honey or molasses and poured it all over somebody's stereo. Oh, it was just total.
Did the women resist?
Well, I don't think we were there long. It's like grab and run.
Yeah.
So
you had shoplifted before.
uh
You had shoplifted before.
well, no, and honestly, I wish I could say that I got a pair of panties. I don't remember.
Okay.
I don't remember, but I think in the back of my mind, I knew that it was wrong, because I'll tell you one thing, I've always looked at myself as a feminist, because even so I started my first employment in Parliament in 1974, full time. And at that point, women and men had different salaries, and
Yeah.
but you know what? In my entire life, I have never internally differentiated between a colleague being male or female. They've always been colleagues. So I wouldn't understand a difference in
I've
salary.
had so many people tell me that they didn't have this gender bias.
No.
But we did hear a story last night. One of the female students was talking about how when she would walk around campus, they would whistle and pinch her butt.
Like that I didn't see. That I didn't see. But again, there were two types of guys. I think there was like I'm not saying enlightened, but sort of the oblivious to gender type of people that I associated with. But there was always the type of guy, and once in a while you meet one of these men, adults today, where they refer to the wife. And so remember, there was one guy in our group who was going out with somebody, and he always said, "My girl." Never used her name or something. And then I remember one time I said, "Does she have a name?" Like, why are you always saying my girl?
Like she was
What is her
recording.
name? Use her name for heaven's sakes, right?
What do you say?
They got very angry and told
Mhm.
me to mind my own business. But
Mhm.
I just found that, or the wife.
Mhm.
Um, uh, Now, so the panty raid was one thing. Then let me tell you two things.
You're having second thoughts about sharing this thing.
So we ran to the market and we got live lobsters.
Oh, no.
Ran into the women. Somehow we got into the women's dorm and went to the washroom when some of the girls were taking showers and put the live lobsters into the shower through behind the curtain. And the screaming. Can you imagine that? So yeah,
I would have been with you on that
no,
one. That one
then
sounds like
okay,
pretty clever.
then okay, and I did this. I admit that I did this. So fourth year, when I was on the team of organizing,
When you were studious.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, it would have been, yeah, it would have been where I had to be
But
studious.
you still had a
I
little bit.
remember. So then we said, okay, you know what we're gonna do with with this new crew? So we went into the washroom toilets and we took peanut butter. We smeared it all over the seats. So it looked like, you know what? Then we called the guys in, lined them up in the wash and said, all right, who did this? This is disgusting. That I walked up to the toilet seat like this and went, you know what? It's, can you imagine that? And the other thing in the girls' residence was putting saran wrap underneath the toilet seat. And that has to be like the oldest joke,
Oh,
you know.
they didn't notice it?
Yeah, well, of course they did
Okay.
because, sort of thing.
But before they sat down, they would have noticed.
Oh, yes.
Late at night.
Then
Oh.
just, I'm going to give you two other little stories. One was, so these people from small towns, rabble rousers, fire. Fire was, I don't know, this particular group was just like into fire. So 4 o'clock in the residence, women's residence, usually people come back from class, go up the elevator, go to their rooms, dump off their books, come down the elevator to go into the cafeteria. So these guys went to the second floor and stopped the elevator. And I was down on the first floor to see what, being told to, you need to stay on the first floor and see what happens. So there's a mob of people waiting on the first floor to get into the elevator. The elevator comes down from the second floor. The people move forward to get in. They had stuffed newspaper on the floor of the elevator and set a fire. So the doors open and the flames are coming up
Oh,
from,
no.
and people are moving forward to get in the elevator. I could not believe that. Second fire story, they took bed sheets and they tied them together and hung them out the window on the side of the building. So the bed sheets went down 4 floors. Then somebody went down to the bottom of the floor, to the floor where the bed sheet was, and lit it on fire so that the bed sheets were on fire all the way up to so these were some absolutely unbelievable. I don't know where the ideas came from. I can't believe that these people weren't arrested or expelled from residence
Can I
at
ask you
that
a
point.
question about it?
Yeah.
It seems like the generation before, the 60s generation, they did some of these stunts and protests, but there seemed to be a purpose for it, like social justice fighting, where this seemed to be like Animal House. It was just
Yeah,
pranks.
no, this is, let me tell you, that is, I've never seen the movie
Mhm.
because that's not the type of movie I
Mhm.
would ever go to see to begin with. But from what people have talked about, yeah, it was like goons.
Mhm.
It was just absolutely out of control craziness. And I don't know.
Is it youth acting out the wild oats or sowing out?
I think basically, I think it had to be made. I don't think everyone shared that
Mhm.
particular view. I have a feeling it may have been mental problem or you know,
Were
psychological.
were they Anglophones more? These
Yeah,
wild.
and they were Anglophones from small Anglophone
The
towns.
Francophones were more
Francophones were more studious,
more studious.
I would say. Well, from the group that I knew and the
Mhm.
group that I would hang out with, you know, that was my choice. But no, I think that though this craziness, I think maybe it was something to do with their upbringing, or
Mhm.
I can't say that it was like a value of the
Mhm.
time, other than it was insanity.
Mhm.
And maybe it was a branch of the orientation week where
Mhm.
basically people were told to be crazy.
But they were rebels without a cause. There was no
Yeah, they
big
were absolutely,
just.
I think they were just crazy,
Mhm. Mhm.
out to do craziness
Mhm.
type of thing.
You've testified very long. I don't want to tire you out,
Yeah.
but if you have at least 5 minutes, I'd have a few more questions
Yes,
about the
please.
departments.
No, no, absolutely. Ask me. I just wanted to just double check. Oh, I just wanted to mention before you do, fashion.
Oh, great,
Okay.
great.
So wooden clogs.
Klumpen,
Yeah. So the from Europe,
the
about
Netherlands.
2 years after everyone was wearing, because I was in Sweden at
Mhm.
one point, at
Yeah.
that point, got family there. Everyone on campus was wearing wooden clogs. You don't see them anymore, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so wooden clogs, bell-bottom jeans, and then cowboy boots. And the cowboy boots were very special. They were the brown tall boots with the square toe,
Yeah.
because the square toe would go into
The
in
stirrup.
the
Yeah.
stirrup. All right. But so what you would have to do, what I was taught from these people from the small town, I had to get a pair of these boots to be cool.
Mhm.
But to be really cool, you buy the boots with the square toe. Then you have to soak the boots in water until they're soft, take a hammer, and then round out the square toe so it's round.
Uh,
So
uh,
then you end up with the same cowboy boot,
uh.
the type of thing. Food, the highlight of the cafeteria food, oh my, it turns my stomach. Hawaiian pizza. Can you imagine pizza with pineapple on it? I don't
Mm.
know, but that was the go-to. Okay. And if you were sophisticated and you went out to a restaurant at that period, you would be ordering Chateaubriand for two,
Okay.
because you only came for two. You would be drinking horrible sweet Matus wine. And for dessert, you would have Black Forest cake.
Black Forest cake.
That was
Mm.
like the top of it,
Uh,
if you're going out on a date, that sort of thing.
mm.
And I think I have said everything.
Well,
So you can ask me the questions that you want. Please, I'll
yeah,
be
well,
happy.
you're going to be a star witness.
Yeah,
I want to go a little bit more into, I want to go
yeah,
into the issue part, but I just want to go back to something you
yeah.
just mentioned, like the clothes you wore. So once you came to campus, you were your own person. You could choose your own clothes. Did your hair go down? Did you shave less? Did your
You know what?
clothing become more?
For 1 year, the rebellious year,
Mhm.
when I didn't go to class and
Mhm.
all that sort of thing, yes, the hair came down to my shoulder. I was told when I went home for Christmas by all my relatives and my parents that I looked like meathead on, what was that program? Edith and the American sitcom, Edith and uh, Archie Bunker.
Archie Bunko,
His
All in the Family.
Yeah, All in the Family.
Yeah,
Meathead was
yeah, yeah,
was
yeah,
the
yeah.
was
Meathead,
the
right?
guy who married
Yeah,
his
yeah, yeah,
daughter,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
So I mustache,
yeah,
I gained weight too,
yeah.
that I would look like Meathead. So that's what I looked like. And then yeah, the clogs, the bell bottoms, and then basically sweatshirt or whatever
Mhm.
it is, and that's how you dressed.
So yeah, it seemed like there was a hair war. Like the teenagers or the university students would wear it long, and their parents would definitely comment on it. It would be like the first thing when you came in the door. So that was kind of what it was.
The Beatles started it,
Yeah,
right? With the Beatles
yeah,
mop
yeah.
haircuts, and then it became rather bohemian, I think.
But did the parents' generation they view that a rejection of their culture, or did they worry that this
Well,
signified that you were?
I think parents very much understood at one point, after the Beatles became accepted, I think what the Beatles did more than just give us great music and help people like me rebel against my parents' culture and everything, was they made my parents' generation accept the shift of generations. I
Okay.
think with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and the long hair and the fashion, that generation finally realized, the post-war generation, that there had been a generational shift, and that they no longer were.
So you had the beatniks before, but in a way they were making some of these hippie ideas more mainstream and acceptable. They were transitioning it.
I think the beatnik culture, you know, I think that is, there are two parts to that: the elitist poetry and,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
the artistic group,
Mm-hmm.
and then the general public,
Mm-hmm.
kids that adopted some of the
Mm-hmm.
you know, living in Toronto in 66, 67, 68, the Yorkville Village,
Mm-hmm.
which is now like one of the most
Mm-hmm.
expensive areas of the city,
It
was
was,
where all the coffee houses were. So we would become weekend hippies.
yeah,
So what would happen is that you would dress up like a hippie on Saturday and Sunday
yeah,
and go and hang out there,
yeah,
and then go back home and
yeah,
transform
yeah,
into the regular person,
yeah,
you know. So I think that was it. But no, but I think the Beatles helped, and the Rolling Stones helped, Ed Sullivan Show
yeah.
helped the generation, post-war generation, to accept that the transition had been made. And in particular, when Boston Symphony and some of these orchestras started playing
Uh-huh.
classical versions of Beatles songs, because previous to that, that the after-war generation, this is trash, this is garbage, it isn't even music.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when Arthur Fiedler started incorporating Beatles songs into his Sunday concerts, and they started playing that on the
Mm-hmm.
radio, all of a sudden, that my parents were saying, well, really?
What about the relationship between music and dancing? Did your parents have an issue with dancing? There was a joke
Oh, I think dancing is every generation. I think it's accepted by every generation. You have to keep up with the changes in dances. I don't think that's as big as
Mhm.
with music, right? Like,
Mhm.
I think it's a accepted thing that you've got to dance the latest dance craze. That's part of dancing.
But did they feel that rock and roll was connected to sexuality in some ways? Like there's a joke in Michigan that you didn't have sex standing up because it could lead to dancing. Like the ministers would prohibit you from having
Oh, well,
dance.
yeah, but isn't that the whole, in the United States, the whole thing about, you know, black music leading to the
Yes,
decay? And
exactly.
I don't think we had that in Canada.
Okay. Okay.
I don't think that, because you know, like Dionne Warwick and the Motown sound and all that,
Yeah.
you know, I was, you know, brought up in Toronto, and we worship that.
Yeah.
And there was not a problem
Yeah.
with, don't think that, or with Elvis, maybe with Elvis Presley, from what I've read, you know, the hips and all that sort of thing at the very beginning,
Yeah.
maybe that was a big issue, but that was sort of a little bit before my time.
Did you
But
listen to funk music during those times?
what did I listen? I'm trying to think. What I listened to was Bob Dylan here on campus. I remember having his records. Neil Young, we worshipped
Mhm.
because he just came out with his two big
Yes,
albums, right?
Harvest.
And you know, Harvest was the later one.
Uh, uh,
Of course, Canada's Gordon
yeah,
Lightfoot.
yeah.
Um, but definitely, rock wise, it would have been Alice, to be cool, right? So, you know,
Yeah.
limited music experience in Toronto. So coming here, I learned to love Alice Cooper,
Mm.
you know, that type of thing. But just to get back to dancing, and you know, I don't want to the sidetrack. So you're saying about, you know, did older generations resent the changes in dance music? And let's put it this way: when disco came in, I was in high school. Uh, Sorry, no, I was at Glendon College at that point, and the discos were in Yorkville as well. So I remember going out with my friends to this disco in Yorkville, and so we show up at this disco. We go into this disco. We get seated, and we're ready to go on the dance floor. Lo and behold, my mother and father are dancing on the dance floor.
Mhm.
Oh my God.
You
I said,
shocker.
let's get the hell out of here. I think it was called Applebee's or Apple Bums or something like that. Yeah, that's so
Yeah.
I don't think parents,
Yeah.
yeah, so they want to be cool.
I just 5 more minutes,
Yeah.
but walk me into Monet's classroom. How many women are there? How many men? How many people have long hair? What is the classroom?
Gosh, okay, so I don't think there were very many women in any of my Canadian history classes from what I remember. But it was everybody basically looked the same. I think
Mm.
everyone had long hair
Mhm.
or longish
Mhm.
hair, and most people were wearing clogs or it was sort of like a thing. Um, classrooms were the classes there were maybe 10 people,
Mhm.
11 people.
Mhm.
There were a few classes held in a different building where there may have been 20 people at the most. Um, one of the great things about classrooms and courses that you had to take was you had to take philosophy
Mhm.
in order to get a history degree.
Critical reasoning or
Oh my
something?
gosh, did that come useful in life?
Mhm.
Oh my Lord, absolutely. And that's what I've always said to people is you can tell the difference between someone who's taken philosophy and is university educated and someone who is just high school educated. Because when you get into a discussion with somebody who hasn't been in university, everything they talk about was from personal experience.
Mhm.
I saw,
Mhm.
I did, I heard, my friend did. You know, somebody from university, it's ideas.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
It's not at all based on personal experience. You
Mhm.
take an idea from somewhere and then you incorporate it into your
Mhm.
argument or your discussion. It's very, very rarely is it based on personal experience.
Mhm.
But yet, people who don't have that benefit of that post-secondary education are very much restricted to the real physical world, what they've
Mhm.
experienced, what they've seen. That's the limit to their discussion.
Did you, when you were on campus, did you go to high culture like the Arts Center or the Bytown
Yes,
Center?
I would go to the art center to see all of the French singers and this little church on the corner.
Sacré-Cœur?
Okay, it burned down
Mhm.
in 1978, I think. When it was still going when I was here, um, they had a little coffee
Mhm.
club in the basement. All of and French Canadian artists had a very limited area for gigs.
Mhm.
And and they didn't earn all that much money. So all of the famous Quebec singers would come to this Le Vieux Clocher, it was called, and they would sing in the basement. So it was like Monique from that generation, Monique Lérac, Isabelle Pierre, René Claude, Claude Dubois, Robert Charlebois. And
So you knew all these French singers and
well,
songs.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Uh,
Your Anglophones friends know those as well, or?
yes, because yeah, even the Notorious Gang,
Uh,
we would go to that. But I was sort of the Francophile leading the group, right?
okay.
So, or even once I graduated, when I was living here in Ottawa with my Anglophone friends, I was always the guy who would say, okay, Salvatore Adamo, Mustaki is coming to the CNA. We've got to go and see him. Aznavour is coming.
Mhm.
Big Code is
Uh,
coming. We must go
uh,
and see, even if you never heard of him, it's
mhm.
important to go
Mhm.
and see, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you're going to be a big star because
I don't know, but
you got us into some really important topics.
but
So,
definitely, if you're talking about women and sexism, it was very much evident in in the values at that time, unfortunately. And I don't know what, and again, I'm trying to think. I don't think there were very many. I don't think there was a single Canadian history professor who was a female
no.
at that particular time.
And the students, who were talking less than 10%.
Yeah, and I did have the only female professor that I had during my 2 years here. I took a course in Canadian literature. Would you believe it? She was from Dallas, Texas, with a heavy Texas accent, and she said, "All right, folks, this time of year, I'd be at the Cotton Bowl, and the sun would be shining, and blah blah blah. And now let's open our books and turn to page 59. We're going to study a poem by Al Purdy." And you know what? And then I want you to read the poem on page 95, Leonard Cohen. Yeah, it was really interesting to have an American from, I don't know what she's doing, how she ended up studying Canadian literature.
Yeah, exactly.
95% of Canadians didn't even know who
exactly.
Alberti was
Yeah.
at that point, right?
Yeah.
So definitely even within faculty, there seemed to be a big lack of females, and it could be the religious background at that point of the, a lot of Jesuit, the Jesuit tradition, classical studies at that point. But I tell you, this university is fantastic. I am so proud of it. I'm supporting it because it is contributing a lot. And just walk along, go to the cafeteria, look at the young people. I was talking to a few of them yesterday when we were having lunch, and the one guy was studying kinetics. I don't, I think is this chemistry, engineering, or whatever it is.
It's human kinetics.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
So I said to him, I said, "What in heaven's name do you want to do with kinetics?" And he said, "Well, I'm still trying to figure that one out."
Yeah, it's like movement of the body.
Okay, the electrical shocks and
no, it has to do like we're kind of biomechanical wrecks because we don't walk properly and everything else.
So he could get into like sports fitness or something like that.
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, listen, I hope that I haven't. I don't think I've insulted anyone personally. I haven't mentioned names, but if